Hey, this is me on a stroll a few days ago. During this walk, I noticed something, so I started taking pictures of it. Eventually, I got my coworkers to join in. Mac took this picture, and Agnes took this one. What we all noticed was this font. If you've somehow managed to never see it on a storefront, you've definitely seen it elsewhere. Because it's everywhere. Strip away the candy wrappers, movie posters, album covers, and corner store signs, and you're left with this typeface. It's called Cooper Black, and the story of how it became so popular has everything to do with its versatility. Because these letters have been around for a century's worth of changes in technology and pop culture. To set the stage for the story, I talked to Stephen Heller.
Bear with me while I move to another part of the apartment.
Among other things, he's written like a library's worth of books about design.
Okay, I'm back.
And this is Bethany Heck.
I am a designer who writes about typefaces.
She runs the Font Review Journal, where she deconstructs the history and design of notable typefaces like Cooper Black.
If you give me 2 minutes, I can run and find an actual physical piece of wood type, and I can talk through some of this. Okay.
While she's doing that, let's travel back in time 100 years to the city of Chicago, where our story begins. It's 1919, right after World War I.
Advertising was reaching an early zenith at that point because with the end of the war, there was a great resurgence of product and demand.
The two dominating materials for commercial printing were wood and metal.
Wood was cut out of the end pieces of hardwood. They were usually large-size typefaces that were used for large-scale advertising and posters.
The bold typefaces you see in old wanted posters, those were made from wood type.
Metal was the process that was created by Gutenberg when he designed the type for his Bible.
Each individual character was physically formed into words, and those words were cast into tiny lines of text. Those molds allowed for smaller, more precise blocks of type.
That's the kind of type that was used for most commercial purposes, from book publishing to magazine publishing.
By the turn of the 20th century, huge Rube Goldberg-like machines called linotypes drastically sped up this process. This is the world Oswald Cooper, Chicago's preeminent letterer and illustrator, lived in. In 1918, after years of making custom hand-lettered ads for car companies and banks, he designed a fully formed typeface dubbed Cooper. It took a classic Roman form and softened the edges. Seeing promise in Cooper's design and the prior success of his lettering work, the type foundry Barnhart Brothers and Spindler asked him to make a bold display typeface based on the font. Around 1920, Oswald Cooper released Cooper Black, and it was an immediate hit. It was used for newspaper headlines and large-scale posters. It sold cars, cold medicine, music lessons, turntables, and ginger ale.
With Cooper Black, it was like somebody took an air pump to a tire and blew up that tire.
This ad for Cooper Black credits the font for getting 5,000 customers into their client's new store on opening day. And in countless reviews, it was considered the most popular typeface design of the time. So, what made it work so well? For one, its curves. Perhaps the most unconventional aspect of the curves are
that willingness to be unafraid to curve the bottom parts of the letter forms. So if you look at the bottom parts of the stems of the A, there's no flat edges on that, which is very strange. If you look at most typefaces, they have flat bottoms somewhere.
Even Cooper Black's imitations, like Gaudi Heavy and Pabst Extra Bold, failed to fully break tradition.
You want that consistent line for legibility. And so the fact that Cooper doesn't have that means that it's very forgiving to irregularities.
Like, the baseline serif of one character naturally flows right into the curve of another, even when the characters are slightly uneven. Those irregularities look more like mistakes than quirks in straighter-edged designs.
The fact that Cooper doesn't necessarily need to be laid in a straight line to look good is an advantage.
Let's talk about this weird F. It's an identifiable feature of Cooper Black. Turns out it's pretty genius.
draw a rectangle around that F, and you have to think like, okay, I've got to draw a really bold F, and I only have this rectangle of space to play with. You've got the crossbars, and then you've got the hook at the top and the serif at the bottom. You're kind of like running out of space.
The shape of this negative space in the ascender allowed Cooper to make the F as bold as possible for as much as possible, while still maintaining legibility, which wasn't always the case for heavy typefaces of the time.
This is actually a good example. Like, this is a very bold 4, and you can see that like the counter space in there is like really tiny. The tininess is what makes the 4 look bold and heavy, but that 4 could get sort of like filled up with ink and then essentially vanish.
These negative spaces within each character made Cooper Black incredibly light and friendly, while still commanding attention.
The fact that it worked both big and small was a huge selling point.
Every character of Cooper Black has its own little quirks.
The G is always the thing that I think about first. It has like this sort of anthropomorphic quality. I think it looks like a duck.
Now that you say that, the Q kind of looks like a snail. Weird. At any rate, I think the letter that shows just how fun and functional Cooper Black can be has to be the O.
A lot of typefaces have a vertical stress, so the oval inside would just point straight up and down.
Cooper's tilts back, and while it looks off-kilter on its own, when placed in a word or phrase, it always seems to complement the letters around it.
The central conflict that a type designer is facing is, how do I make something that feels cohesive as a whole design system, as opposed to a beautiful collection of letters?
Somehow, Cooper achieved both. Oswald Cooper believed Cooper Black was at its best when there was thin spacing between the words and not much leading between the lines. Basically, it worked best when the letters were all cramped together, but that sometimes posed a problem.
Even when Cooper Black was first designed, like, just the act of squishing type together tight was, like, in some cases extremely difficult or impossible to do.
In the 1950s, 2 dramatically new ways of printing made it easier to push letters closer together. And that thrust Cooper Black into the second half of the 20th century.
There was a basic change in the material of which type is made, a change from lead to paper or film.
The first was phototype. Hot metal typecasting was replaced by film strips in dark rooms. And by the early 1960s, machines like the phototypositor were small enough to fit in local print shops. The other was the invention of dry rub transfers, which just required a ballpoint pen and a piece of paper. It was perfect for customizing headlines. Letraset, the company that made them, marketed it as fast, simple, and economical. These 2 technologies opened up graphic design to more adventurous compositions, something wood and metal had struggled to do. And Cooper Black flourished. It thrived as always in advertising. Its friendly curves fit the tongue-in-cheek aesthetic of the 1960s and 70s. But it also showed up in magazines, movies, and hundreds of album covers.
Pet Sounds was like the quintessential setting. Just look at the way the D works with the E, and the Y in boys fits so nicely over the O. Its fluidity is what makes it special, and its boldness makes it special.
I think all type designers would come in and say, like, they have an idea of how a typeface is meant to be used, but I think that a typeface doesn't really reach its full potential until it's put into somebody else's hands.
Because Cooper Black was readily available in Letraset and Typositor catalogs, it was no longer just in the hands of professionals and designers. It was in the hands of the DIYers of the counterculture movement. It seamlessly jumped from Burger King to underground posters and magazines and became a staple.
The idea of using something that's basic vernacular, but using it with intention to make a statement is something that you see throughout design or cultural history.
These early hip-hop posters are actually the perfect example of Cooper Black's adaptability and its legacy. Like, take a look at this one. It doesn't really matter that these are 2 lowercase L's because the S fits so perfectly next to them. And the type's ability to be squeezed as tightly as possible and still be incredibly legible holds up, even under extreme circumstances.
It's always fun to look at something that's used in a sort of lowbrow way and then to realize that this isn't like some cheap, tacky thing. This is actually like very good.
That's why Cooper Black is just as popular today as it was when it was first made. From corner store signs and fashion brands to food packaging, grassroots movements, and hip-hop album covers.
Cooper's ability to work as like rub-on letterings and in phototype and as movable type and also now like in digital, that's why it's everywhere. And that's something that Oswald Cooper couldn't have predicted.